What's up, guys? So, this morning, let's talk about the angular adjustments of your scope and what they really mean when you're getting way out there. So, it's pretty common knowledge that people understand that minute of angle is pretty at any given distance pretty much coincides with an inch. But it's not actually an inch. It's a little bit different. See, 1 minute of angle at 100 yards is 1.047 inches. And the further you go out, it gets bigger and bigger from there. Like when you start talking like, say, 10 minutes of angle, now it's 10.47 inches. Okay? So it's an angular measurement. It doesn't go in a straight line. Well, it goes straight, but it's angular. So you can't think of it as being a parallel adjustment, if that makes sense. So most scopes, most rifle scopes, or even optics in general, whether it's a red dot or a prism or scope, if they're all of them are, if the adjustments are in minutes of angle, most red dots are going to move a half minute per click. Some of them move a full minute per click. In prism scopes, they'll move either a half or a quarter minute, and then in rifle scopes typically move a quarter minute per click at 100 yards. It's really at any distance, it's going to be the same. It's going to be a quarter minute of angle at every distance. 1 click is a quarter minute. Some rifle scopes are an 1/8 minute adjustments, which gives you a little bit more of a fine-tuning ability as far as zeroing your rifle. But at shorter ranges, it means you have to dial more. You know, when you're trying to count the clicks, say somebody, whoever your spotter is or something, tells you, hey, I need you to dial up 3 minutes of angle. Okay, on a quarter minute adjustment scope, that means 12 clicks, right? 1/4 of a minute is, how it adjusts. So you need 3 full minutes. You're going to have 3 times 4, so 12 clicks. And then on an 1/8 minute scope, you would have double that. It would be 24 clicks to get the same adjustment. And the 1/8 minute scopes typically don't have as much adjustment range within the scope. You may not, like on a quarter minute scope, like the Arkans that I use, I believe they're 108 or 110 minutes of total adjustment. And then like on an 1/8 minute adjustable scope, it may be a lot less than that. It may be half of that. It may be 55 minutes of total adjustment. So when we really get out to longer ranges, see, whether you're shooting 100 yards or 1,000 yards or more, a quarter minute is a quarter minute. But the amount that it moves, or the amount the bullet moves when you move at a quarter minute, see, 1 click at 100 yards is roughly going to move your impact a quarter of an inch, roughly. A little bit more than a quarter of an inch at 100 yards. As long as your scope's tracking right and it's a decently high quality scope. At 1,000 yards, it's going to move 10 times that much. So, because it's 10 times the distance, see? So, at 1,000 yards, 1 click on your scope is going to move your bullet's impact by about 2.5 inches. Actually, a little more than 2.5 inches. And then, 2,000 yards, it would be over 5 inches of bullet impact shift per every click on that scope. So yeah, at really long range, it would seem that, you know, having an 1/8 minute scope that's a little finer adjustment would be better, but it's a slower thing to do because it takes more clicks, and you have to keep track of all of those clicks, so that if you have to change distance or whatever, or if your windage changes, you have to know, like, hey, I went 33 clicks this direction, the wind shifted, and now I need to come back 33 clicks and then some. So versus in a 1/4 minute scope, you're like, oh, well, I went 12 clicks this way. That's an easy, like, you can very easily count 12 clicks and not get lost. So in a real short range, like a short range bench rest, I would say that an 1/8 minute adjustment would be useful, where you're not really trying to reach way out there, but you want really precise adjustment. But in like really long range, you know, when you get way out there, that 1/8 minute, you can get kind of lost in that. At least I think you can. So shooting long range, most of the time, at least the most common practice is you're going to dial the elevation, you're going to indicate it in your turret, and then you're going to hold the wind most of the time, unless the wind's really blowing and it's a really steady breeze, and then in some cases you can dial the wind. The reason why it's not really recommended that you dial the wind is because the wind is not constant. The elevation adjustment, the distance is constant, but the wind itself can change at any given moment, and if you're shooting a really long ways, it can have several different changes between you and the target. So it's really, dialing the wind can really kind of screw you up unless you're like extremely conscious and focused on how much you're dialing, and then really focused on how much the wind is shifting, and you're, you know, all of that stuff, you're really good at keeping that, keeping all of that in line in your mind. You could dial the wind, but it tends to be a little bit too complicated and a little bit too much to organize in your head, especially if you're in a competition or something. So when you're holding the wind, this is where knowing what all the little subtensions and all the little different marks in your reticle, you have to know what those values are to do it correctly. You'll notice on your horizontal crosshair that it's going to have different size hash marks on it. Typically it'll have a little one, and then a big one, and then a little one, and a big one, and each one of those has a different value. You'll see that well, I wish these guys would come on and get out here on the road. There we go. So you'll see that in your owner's manual with your rifle scope that the little mark may be maybe a 1/4 minute, and then the larger mark may be a half, and then you'll have another little mark, which would be your, you know, if you keep going down the line, it'll, you know, 1/4, half, 3/4, 1, etc. And then also with your reticle, if you really look at it, the thickness of the line is actually a measurement that you can use. And if you use a first focal plane reticle, it's actually really useful. It's harder to use a second focal plane unless you know which dial power that's focused for, and most of them are set at 10. 10 power is where the reticle is actually useful for measuring things. Other than that, you need to know what those little marks are on your scope and how much each one of, like, what the value is for each one of those. Otherwise, it's just a bunch of stuff on your scope that you really don't know what it's for. But there's a very, very good reason. Each one of those things has its own reason and meaning, and learning how to use that will help you. And sometimes I have to refresh myself on my scopes. Sometimes I have to look back in there and say, oh, okay, well, this little mark here means that it has this value. And then everything makes more sense that way. It's not something I use all the time because I don't really shoot all that far, and most of the time I don't need to use any holdover or anything like that. Generally, the only time I've really noticed I've needed or could have used some holdover is at 300 yards or more. Once you get to 300, especially 300 or further, any little bit of wind, even if it's only 1 or 2 miles, will actually start showing up on the target. You can actually start seeing that your bullets are not hitting. They'll drift a little and hit over to the side. Like my target that I did the drop test on for the 6.5 PRC, you'll notice that at 100 yards, the group is nice and centered perfectly where I want it. At 200, it's about a quarter. The center of the group, where the center is about a quarter inch off to the right, and then at 300 yards, it actually had moved almost a full inch off of center. So at full inch at 300 yards, let's see, one click at 300 yards is going to be 3/4 of an inch, right? So I could have moved my scope, I could have adjusted my scope 1 click, and it would have brought it pretty close back to center. If I'd have gone 2 clicks, it would have brought the group actually to the left instead of the right. Instead of shooting off the right, I would have been shooting off the left. And really the only way to get it back to dead center in that wind condition would be to actually hold and just make a use your spatial perception in your mind and hold over where it needs to be held, with the reticle in the scope instead of dialing the wind. Now, like I said before, if you're shooting a real long ways and you know that the wind is constantly at least 20 miles an hour or something, or at least 10 miles an hour, but it's gusting, the minimum's 10, but it's hitting upwards of 20, then you can dial enough in your reticle to get that 10 miles an hour, and then if it kind of spikes up a little bit, you can hold the extra, and that will help in that situation. But that's one of those things that you would really have to practice that. You really have to have a good coach, a good wind caller, and it would be something that would take a while to really learn how to do effectively. And so most of the time, for most people, holding the wind is going to be the easiest thing to do, as long as the wind's not blowing so hard that you're having to hold off the target. That can get a little tricky. Getting into that old school Kentucky windage deal where you don't even adjust, you're just guessing how far above the target you need to hold, and you're guessing how far to the right or left depending on which direction the wind is going and how fast the wind is, and you just kind of hold off and shoot based on instinct. But that kind of instinct, if you're going to be good at using it, it's going to come from lots and lots and lots of range time, lots of shooting, typically a lifetime of shooting before you really can understand and get good with that kind of stuff. So yeah, I just wanted to go over some meanings for the, how your angular adjustments in your scope work and what they mean, and kind of help people learn to use them a little better. I'm not the best at it, but hopefully maybe I can explain it in a way that helps somebody. I know there's other people that may explain it a different way and probably do a lot better job of it. I just was thinking about it this morning, and I thought, why not talk about it while I'm on my way to work? So anyways, I thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you next time in the next video.